All right, welcome everybody to episode 4 of the Vintage Spotlight podcast. This is a spinoff from the Vintage Spotlight segment that Leighton and I have been recording live on the Sports Cards Live YouTube channel for over a year and a half now. Leighton, happy to do another episode here with you today. The National wrapped up a couple of weeks ago. How have you been doing ever since you got home, and have you been able to wind down?
It's been difficult, but I've been doing great, and I'm grateful to be as busy as ever.
Well, hey, it's always good to be busy. I've come back. I spent a few days in Montreal with the family after the National, and then I came back here to the studio, and it has been one thing after another. Very busy with content, having a great time, and I'm excited to do this episode. We are going to bring on a guest a little bit later on today to the episode for our collector spotlight segment. So stay tuned, everybody. Be ready for that. But Leighton, why don't we jump in and get into the first thing we like to talk about, which are some key sales that have happened at auction in the vintage realm. And why don't you kind of kick it off? I know there's a few items on VCP that had caught your attention. Why don't you jump off and talk about the first one of those?
Yes, just to correct, SCP, Sports Cards Plus. The old school, now Sotheby's, spinoff with David Kohler. So really, you could check out their website at scpauctions.com. But in particular, Jeremy, we're going to be talking about two pieces of memorabilia. And the first one, which is, if you are in the autograph world, is a monumental piece. They recently sold what is known to be just a handful in existence, the inaugural Baseball Hall of Fame class. The first time that they ever had an actual induction ceremony was in 1939. There was 11 living members at the time, including Babe Ruth and Cobb and Walter Johnson and Cy Young. Well, they had a baseball that was signed by all 11 members that were there in 1939, and it sold for an incredible $360,000. I think what's super cool about it is the provenance. It actually comes from a former Major League Baseball pitcher and umpire who was physically there in 1939 collecting these 11 signatures himself. I just thought it was fascinating, the actual provenance behind the ball and how really this day and age, even with grading and cards being as popular as they are, a relic like this sold for big, big money.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's really cool. I love the provenance. You mentioned Eddie Rommel was the MLB pitcher and umpire. Very cool piece right here, as you can see. The Babe Ruth auto, the Walter Johnson. I have to think Honus Wagner is on here too as one of the original inductees. Now, it's interesting here, Leighton. It says on June 12th, 1939, the very first Hall of Fame induction ceremony was held in Cooperstown to honor the classes of 36, 37, 38, and 1939. Tell us a bit about that.
Well, that was what was so interesting, is that the Hall of Fame had actually had a few inductions, but for whatever reason or another, deemed that the first year they actually held a ceremony was in 1939. So you can imagine, I mean, Jeremy, think about this. This is, of course, forget about pre-internet. I don't really know that many people were collecting back then. So to me, to have the foresight to document that just incredible event by going and getting these signatures and then having it be preserved for just multiple decades, to me is mind-boggling.
It truly is. I like that in the listing here, they do list off here on SCP. They list off all the living attendees that were there and signed the ball. And yeah, Honus Wagner was in that first class. I believe Honus Wagner is from the original class, which would have been, I guess, the 36 class.
Correct.
That's really interesting stuff. So this ball sells for $360,000. In the description here, it also tells us that in 2019, one of the only other 1939 original 11 Hall of Famer balls sold for $623,000. Leighton, it would be really awkward, and I feel like I would be doing a disservice to these historical items to say that it fell in value by almost 50%. But can you describe or explain any of your theory as to why would a similar ball with the same autograph sell for over $600,000 in 2019, and 5 years later, $360,000? Do you have any theory on that?
Sure. It was a great question, Jeremy. And I remember the sale at the time a few years back, but I don't remember the quality of the ball. So number one, it is possible, forget about grading, that the ball was just nicer, meaning nicer signatures. The ball was a little bit whiter. So that's possible. Number two, at the time, seeing as how that might have been the only original 11 to sell, maybe since that has since sold, the person who won that ball doesn't want another. And as we know, the way auctions work, Jeremy, it takes two to tango and really take that price from approximately 360,000 to 600-something thousand. So I think that's another possible explanation. But then we talked about it a little bit off air. We all love our cards and we all love our vintage memorabilia. And I think one of the challenges that the memorabilia market faces versus the card market, it's just not as liquid. So in other words, we were talking about even something as simple as a 1986 Fleer Michael Jordan card or a 1933 Gaudy Babe Ruth. In other words, if you have a 1933 Gaudy Babe Ruth in a condition of a 3 out of a 10, we kind of know it generally falls between X and Y. But with memorabilia, it's a little bit more difficult. And you're talking about an actual 3D object that maybe doesn't have that many of them around. So in other words, maybe to one person, the ball being whiter is really important. But then to another person, the signatures being bolder is also really important. As we all know, with art and cards, beauty is in the eye of the beholder.
Yeah, I think that's got to be a part of it. I think maybe the most important thing is that, the pool of people that can afford and collect items like this, once one person acquires it, they're no longer in the bidding pool, as you were alluding to. So there is, if the one that sold for over $600,000 in 2019 was a bidding war between two guys, and the underbidder who didn't win it was, so the winner is no longer in the game. He's got his ball. The underbidder might have been the guy who bought this for 360, and the next time one of these comes up, the person who didn't win this ball here on SCP might buy it for $280,000 or $250 or whatever it may be, because they're the most aggressive bidders are out of the game now. That's just a theory. All right, there was another item that you wanted to talk about, and I'm going to bring that one up right now because this is a really cool piece. And sold for right around the same amount, but this is a newly discovered Kobe Bryant, LA Lakers game-worn warm-up jacket photo match to his final career game, the 60-point game, worn on April 13th, 2016, I believe. Leighton, tell us about why you find this to be a really interesting item for us to talk about today.
Well, first off, if you grew up in the MJ and the Kobe era, to a lot of folks that didn't see MJ play, Kobe is their MJ. Okay. So number two, as we all know, Kobe died tragically as a young man. And if you go on to read this description, this warm-up in particular, of course, is very important. But in terms of pricing, that's an astronomical price for a warm-up to sell for. But if you read a little bit more about the background, the provenance, and then, of course, why this is such an important game-used relic, this might very well be the only game-used artifact to ever become available for public sale from Kobe Bryant's last game. And I'm sure we could think of a number of reasons why, Jeremy. Kobe's family doesn't need the money. So if they have the jersey, they're not going to sell it. And so I thought that really contributed to the final price. And I think it was just a perfect storm where ton of demand for Kobe, very little supply of game-used artifacts from his last game, thus a record incredible $336,000 auction price.
I can tell you, if I won this, I'd be wearing it everywhere. What a beautiful piece of clothing that is. What a great jacket. A very important piece. I kid, of course. I would preserve this thing like no other. A wonderful item. And congratulations to whoever added this to the collection. I wonder if we'll find out or see it on display in some sports bar or something like that. Okay.
I'm hoping we do.
Yeah, for sure. It's an incredible piece. All right. Good stuff on SCP. There was one more item that we're going to talk about, which is also going to help segue us into our diving into a set of cards that we like to do here on the Vintage Spotlight. So we have on REA right here the Willie Mays, the 1951 Bowman Willie Mays. This is his one and only true rookie card. It's a PSA 8.5. And the reason why it's just worthy to talk about now, if for no other reason, is that it's at a current bid of $310,000, which has already set an all-time record for the public sale of this card. $310,000 is the highest we've seen. It's actually, with the buyer's premium, closer to about $380,000 right now, Leighton. You know, when I tell you that here we have, and this item ends on August the 11th, which is 2 days from now. This podcast may not release until the day after. So keep that in mind. This might be over and the new record will have been set, but it may be higher than the current bid, which again at 310 is bound to go even higher potentially. We will know for sure by the end of the day on Sunday, August the 11th, 2024, what the final record price is. But Leighton, what are your thoughts on the records, the fact that this particular Willie Mays card is about to set a new record?
Well, first, I want to just set some context if I could, because the population report is relevant here, Jeremy.
Of course, yeah.
The PSA pop report can be referenced at psacard.com. And we checked right before we went live. Currently, there is only one PSA 8.5 graded to date, and there are 8 PSA 9s, and there are no PSA 10s. And so this is a card that not only is very tough to find in high grade with PSA, but it also sells very infrequently. And I believe it's for a number of reasons, because number one, a few of these higher end examples might be tied up in a 1951 Bowman set registry, meaning a high-end set. Number two, there are a lot of Willie Mays collectors who don't care about the 1951 Bowman set, but they want to have the best of every Mays from 1951 until the end of his career. And so I think, once again, Jeremy, this is just a perfect storm with him recently passing, with a low population, with it being extremely difficult to find in high grade. And you have set collectors, Willie Mays collectors, potential some institutional money that might want to come in and buy this for a long-term investment. I think this could be $1 million plus card. There's just a lot of factors pointing to it potentially selling for even more when the gavel hits on Sunday night.
Yeah. And, you know, I wonder, as a high-grade copy sets a new record, what does that do? What impact does that have on all the lower-grade copies, or the ones that are at least available for sale in the period thereafter, where there may be some attention, some excitement because of a record-breaking sale? We see this all the time in the hobby, where the highest grade 52 Topps Mickey Mantle, or 79 O-Pee-Chee Wayne Gretzky, or Michael Jordan 86 Fleer, or Star 101 from 84 sells for a new record that tends to drag up the other, a rising tide lifts all boats sort of thing. We do see that. Now, it's exciting, and we wanted to dive into the 51 Bowman set a little bit as well, because it's such an exciting set. It's such a beautiful set. I love the set personally. I have 2 key cards from the set in my personal collection that I absolutely adore and love. It's so funny to talk about cardboard that way, but it's true. Call me crazy if you want. That's how I feel. But the 51 Bowman set, let's transition into that a little bit, because the way I look at it is the 51 Bowman set does contain the rookie cards of a couple of key Hall of Famers, Mickey Mantle and Willie Mays. But the 52 Topps set is the one that gets a lot of the love and attention. The 52 Topps Mickey Mantle is a card that is probably the most iconic card in the whole sports card hobby, yet it's not his true rookie card. So when we think about that, Leighton, and you've been dealing in all of these cards for so many years, for decades now, and I've been collecting the 51 Bowman. I bought my Mantle in 2007, bought my Mays in 2020, I believe. In any event, from your perspective, your client's perspective, what you see out there in the marketplace, is the 51 Bowman set is it becoming more important as the hobby recognizes that the true rookie cards for the key Mickey Mantle and Willie Mays actually reside in the 51 Bowman versus the 52 Topps?
I think it is, but I think it is for a few different reasons. So I want to be clear. If the 1951 Bowman Mickey Mantle rookie and the 1951 Bowman Willie Mays rookie were currently selling for more on average than the 52 Topps Willie Mays and the 52 Topps Mickey Mantle, this would be a different discussion. Meaning, at least in my experience, there are some collectors who are like you and I, Jeremy. They are just over the moon about the 51 Bowman, Mays, and Mantle. They love the card regardless of you call it a rookie, his second year. It doesn't matter. They just love the card. but there is a segment of folks who are actually going out and acquiring the Willie Mays 1951 Bowman and the Mickey Mantle 1951 Bowman, if for no other reason, because they believe they're both undervalued. Because they've seen that even though the Mickey Mantle card is not his rookie, we were talking about this a little bit off air. Guess what? The 1952 Topps Willie Mays is not his rookie either. But yet it sells for big money in high grade. And so as we sit here and discuss, and I'd love to know from the audience what your opinion is. So the Mickey Mantle 1952 Topps is from the high series, but the Willie Mays 1952 Topps is not. But for some reason or another, in the last few years, the 1952 Topps Willie Mays has also taken off in price. So it begs the question, and you just asked us a few minutes ago, is this the time now for the 1951 Bowman Willie Mays rookie to shine? Because this 8.5 is going to close. As we said, we don't know when our 4th episode of Vintage Spotlight will drop, but inevitably this card is going to set the record. We also believe it will likely bring up, even if it's just a short flash in the pan, some of the lower grade 1951 Bowman Willie Mays rookies will likely see at least a short-term bump. I have my own opinion, which I'm going to render in a second, but I'd love to know from the community, from the folks who are consuming this, what is your take on this? Do you think that the Willie Mays rookie 1951 Bowman is just a better play, is a better deal than the 52 Topps, considering it's not even from the high number series? I don't know, but personally for me, as you said, Jeremy, I long ago acquired a Willie Mays and a Mickey Mantle 1951 Bowman because I inherently believe that not only are they the rookie cards, but I also believe that as more people, I don't know if we're going to 10x the hobby the way Fanatics thinks we will, but inevitably we'll find out in a few weeks at Fanatics Live what's going on with the vibe there. Putting that aside, I just think that as people educate themselves, they won't necessarily care what pre-hobbyists before them coming into the hobby thought. People will start to think for themselves. And I believe there's going to be a faction of people that are new, but start collecting vintage, that are going to not care what the lore of the 1952 Topps set in particular, the high number series, is to them. They want the true rookie cards of Mickey Mantle, and they will want the true rookie cards of Willie Mays.
Yeah, great points. And I have a question because I don't follow this as close as perhaps you do. We know that the 52 Topps Mickey Mantle in the same grade will outsell the 51 Bowman Mickey Mantle rookie card. So the 52 first Topps card will outsell the 51 true rookie of Mickey Mantle. Does the same law apply for Willie Mays? Does the 52 Topps Willie Mays outsell the 51 Bowman?
Great question.
Mays in
So I'm going to start with the low grade because the high grade I want to kind of dive into the numbers a little bit off air. But I believe that a Willie Mays 1952 Topps in a 1 is about $2,000-ish, give or take with eye appeal. A 1951 Bowman Willie Mays rookie is actually a drop more than that in a 1. So it's interesting, once again, is there something there that we're going to see with this 1951 Bowman Willie Mays PSA 8.5 about to smash records in the REA auction? Is that going to continue to propel the 1951 Bowman Mays from the top and now these lower grade ones and continue to see increased pricing? I don't know, but you bring up a great point, Jeremy, because it's not the same for the 51 Bowman Mantle, because a 1952 Topps Mantle in a 1, even if it's terrible, sells for 25 or 30,000-ish. Whereas a 1951 Bowman Mickey Mantle in a 1 is about a $5,000 card.
Yeah, interesting. And we often hear the comparison for the Mickey Mantle, the 52 Topps versus the 1951 Bowman, as an analogy to the 86 Fleer Michael Jordan versus the 84 Star 101. A lot of you hear the narrative somewhat that well. It's a similar situation, and it is a similar situation. The 86 Fleer came out 3 years into his career, where the 52 Topps, again, was not a rookie year card for Mickey Mantle. But I think one of the key differences there is what defines a rookie card. And there's really never been, I don't think there's ever been an argument out there that anyone could really stand on saying that the 52 Topps is the Mickey Mantle rookie card. We do see sellers of that card often call it a rookie. I think it's out of convenience more than anything else. But I don't think there's ever been an argument put forth that has legs to stand on that would say that the 52 tops Mickey Mantle or Willie Mays are their rookie cards. Does that align with your thoughts?
It does. I think that what you're seeing, a lot of folks who are true tops lovers and hobbyists will say, well, because it's their first tops card, that's their rookie. That doesn't necessarily work for me, but that's what makes the hobby so interesting. Yeah. Everyone can decide for themselves.
And it's still not, listen, I'm not trying to take anything away from the 52 top set. Those are iconic cards, very important. For whatever reason, the 51s have kind of been the little brother to the 52 tops, but I think that their significance and importance can't really be overstated. And for those reasons, those are the cards I've chosen to purchase over the years, are the 51 Bowman. I believe they're the true rookie cards. I think most people do. And, not to say I wouldn't like a 52 tops Mickey Mantle or Willie Mays. I certainly would, but they're just so expensive. They've gotten out of reach for the most part. So I'm going to probably move on. The 51 Bowman set, though, what are the other key cards from that set, Leighton, just to wrap up?
That's a great question. The next best card in the set as far as a rookie is the Whitey Ford card. And what's so interesting is, of course, he was a dominant Yankee pitcher, especially in the World Series, and he's a Hall of Famer. But he also happens to be just the number one card in the set. And so that makes it even more challenging to find it in really nice condition. And I remember I had years ago PSA 8 Whitey Ford, and I remember thinking, oh, I'll get one back, and I sold it. And of course, I haven't had one since. And that card is just really a beautiful, beautiful card.
Right on.
Okay. But there is the Nellie Fox rookie. He's a Hall of Famer. And then in terms of just some of the all-time greats, I mean, Teddy Ballgame has a card in there, Roy Campanella. So it's a super fun set, but it does not have Jackie Robinson.
Yeah. Oh, imagine if it did. But there's a 1950 Bowman.
There is, but I'm curious as to, did his contract expire because he doesn't have anything going on in 51? Of course, he does a 52 tops card, but no Bowman 52 Jackie.
And, but that, in a way, that's good for collectors because now you don't need to chase a 50 and a 51 Bowman Jackie. You can just chase the 50 Bowman Jackie. Yes. We're going to hear more about Jackie a little bit later in the episode. Let's transition out to our, what we call, vintage trends or observations surrounding vintage cards, sort of mixing with fresh takes here, because there is an issue going on in the hobby that I think is being talked about right now. It's timely, and it applies to vintage as well. And that is this whole discovery that there's some people out there, I would call them nefarious characters, that are x-raying their unopened product, their unopened sports cards, whether it's, sealed cases of National Treasures or Prism or whatever it might be. But you got to think that this could also apply to vintage. And Leighton, you in your Vintage Breaks business, you break vintage packs on the platform. When you first learned about all this controversy around these MRI machines x-raying unopened product, what did that make you think as it relates to your Vintage Breaks business?
Oh, candidly, at first I was hoping it wasn't true. Meaning I hope that it wasn't possible. I hope that maybe someone tried but failed. And, whatever the case may be, it wasn't going to be something that was going to be an issue. And as we talked about it prior to the recording of the show, it is absolutely something that is very relevant to discuss, which is why we chose to talk about it in the Vintage Spotlight. And so what I'm doing is I'm keeping an ear to the ground and making sure that if there's any developments, I stay aware of them. One of the things that I wanted to bring up, we didn't really talk about off air, but of course, I hope it's not possible. Only time will tell. But if there is any single breaker or breakers that have been shown to use this in a way to have an advantage in any way, shape, or form, I just hope that news gets out so that the public can decide from there who they would break with or not break with, if you catch my drift. Yeah. Because I think that, of course, is not an acceptable practice in any way, shape, or form.
I agree. I think it's gonna cause people to have a little bit of uncertainty when it comes to breaking product. I wonder what impact it'll have on the overall breaking business. And it comes back to, who do you trust, and who, there are bad apples in this industry, but there's so many good people who are doing things the right way. And I think once you, as a person who likes to take part in breaks, vintage or modern or somewhere in between, you just have to deal with people that you believe are doing the right thing. And it's maybe it's a bit of a leap of faith because you can't really get into anyone else's brain and know exactly what they're thinking. But if you have been doing business with somebody for a long enough time, if you've been consuming their content for a long enough time, and or maybe even know them and have met them in person, perhaps you're comfortable and you can take that. If it is possible to x-ray these things, which I think it is, it seems like it is, you almost have to take that leap of faith and just believe in the people that you believe in. And because otherwise, what's if every single unopened pack, box, case out there is being scrutinized and not believed in anymore? Well, what happens to the unopened product business? I think it changes the market considerably if people like overwhelmingly are skeptical.
Well, I mean, a few things there to unpack. All great points, Jeremy. So number one, you absolutely, whether it be you're talking about unopened or vintage cards, but to be fair, modern cards as well, you should align yourself with a shop, with a breaker, with a collector or group of collectors or group of breakers or group of shops that you can rely on for information. And so I've been consuming a lot of content from other content creators in the space because they have been chatting about and talking about this very issue, it seems like, for the last couple of weeks. And I forgot the name of the podcast, but I want to give them credit. I don't know if it's Sports Card Madness or something to that effect, but he was going to actually interview one of the companies that was offering the service. And what I heard, at least so far through the grapevine, is that vintage might be safe because there is no way for them to actually detect any noticeable difference on this cards in a particular pack. So for example, if you take that 1955 Bowman pack that we opened all those years ago that yielded the Mickey Mantle in the 19th spot out of 20 cards, that card doesn't have any different features other than the card number and of course a different picture. But what I've heard so far is that the reason why this is very alarming to the unopened market in particular is because on the modern side of things, there are so many different shapes and sizes with patches, things like Flawless that have gems. And so it's just a little bit potentially more easy to discover potentially using this CAT scanning service, if I'm saying it correctly. So listen, we don't know exactly what's going to happen yet. I do hope that if there are issues, that on the modern side of the things, whether it be its Tops, Panini, Upper Deck, Leaf, so on and so forth, I have to imagine, Jeremy, that they're going to not only recognize this as an issue, but they're going to take steps to try to rectify that moving forward. And so, listen, for now, I would say stay tuned to podcasts such as ours, the Vintage Spotlight, and there's countless others that are fantastic podcasts out there. And make sure that you stay on top of the information because that's what I'm going to do.
Yeah, same here. I think it's important to understand how this story develops and follow the impact that it's going to have on this great hobby of ours. Okay, let's bring on our guest for this episode, none other than Dave Schwartz of the Iowa Dave of the Shallow End podcast. Dave, welcome to the Vintage Spotlight.
It's great to be here. I've enjoyed listening to the discussion up to this point, and it allowed me to go on a deep dive of Eddie Rommel while I was waiting in the room. So I'm now probably one of the world's premier Eddie Rommel experts.
That's cool. You know, isn't that what's so great about our hobby, Dave, is that we could just so easily go down rabbit holes. And it's not always about cards. It's about players or uniform styles or whatever the case may be. Thanks again for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Happy to be here.
It's the history. And this is, I think what you were saying there, Leighton, the history of the game, the history of the sport we collect. And that's why we collect, to preserve history in a lot of ways. That's a big, big part of it, to become one with history and to connect ourselves to the past, the great ball games, the great sports that really take us away from a lot of the other issues going on in the world, our personal lives. We like to kind of escape in sports, and collecting the history is a huge part of it. Great observation there. Dave, welcome to the show. And the reason why we invited you on is because, well, you have a great story to tell. I mean, you've been chronicling your hobby experience on the Shallow End podcast, but you recently acquired a really interesting card. I'd like you to save, kind of revealing what it is till the end, even though a lot of listeners and viewers may already know from following you yourself on your platform. But can you share with us your story of how you progressed from kind of getting back into the hobby in the shallow end, and what your journey has led you to, and this epic moment at the National in Cleveland.
Absolutely. So I collected as a kid, like many. For me, it was between 83 and 90. And then like others, I jumped back in 2020. And I jumped back in because I was trying to get out, in that I went home to where I grew up, to my dad's place down in St. Louis. It was during COVID. Went down to see him, and my collection of cards from as a kid were still on the right side of my closet in my childhood room. I was insanely organized. I had binders, I had boxes, I had everything labeled. I had some things on top loaders. And thank you to my parents, they never tossed it. They just left it right there, dust and all. And so went home, my family, loaded them into the back of our car and drove them back up with the intention of selling them or throwing some out, recycling some, and did that with most of them and got about 15 of them graded, and sold all of those as well, except for one. And I was down to one graded card, and it was 91 Upper Deck Michael Jordan in the baseball uniform. Got a PSA 10.
Wow.
And hooray, young me, for keeping things nice and neat, right? And this was a Michael Jordan card in 2020 as things were going up, and it sold for way more than I expected, had any idea that it was going to sell for. And so I said to my wife, do you mind if I keep some playing around money for this? And that became the seed money for what became my collection, right?
So
I put
cool.
some of it in and went to groceries and whatever else. And that was it. And I jumped back in with an Anthony Edwards Prism base rookie. That's what I was supposed to do.
It's all right.
No, it's fine. I laugh at myself too. And that was it. But gradually over the next couple of years, I realized I'm a baseball card guy. And so I just went straight back to baseball cards, buying things like Juan Soto. It took me 6 months of ripping wax to realize that Don Russ cards didn't have the team logo on it. And it suddenly hit me one evening. Wait a minute. Where's the Royals logo on a Bobby Witt card? And that's how I learned about unlicensed cards and everything else. So it was just trial and error, as the rated rabbi calls it, you're paying tuition, right? And so that was my paying tuition. And then anyway, long story short is I just have gradually transitioned almost my entire collection to baseball and cards that I like. And it's a mix of vintage to active players, but baseball is what I collect now.
Really interesting, and I'm glad to get the backstory. So now tell us a little bit about after you took that play money that your wife, confirmed you could do, and you started to build your collection back up. How significant has the vintage part of the hobby been to you? How do you rank in your own interest? Are you more interested in vintage than modern than vintage? How do you look at the two different eras of collecting, and what have you done with your collection in recent months?
I don't look at one as being more valuable to the other. I have more personal connection to players who have existed and played during my life, just sort of naturally. That would be players from like 1980 on. I was born in the 70s, but I became conscious of players in the early 80s, Ricky Henderson, Don Mattingly, Ozzie Smith, those types of guys, right? But I am a history nut and a sports historian. I even wrote a book once about sports history. So I have a real tie, a real professional and just personal interest in history. So that's why I like vintage cards, whether it's St. Louis players, me having grown up in St. Louis, so Gibson, Musial, George Sisler, Satchel Paige, those types of guys. Or people have historical meaning, Jackie Robinson, Nap Lajoie, whoever. It might be Reggie Jackson. So my interest in vintage cards ties to the history and the meaning of what those players mean to American culture, sporting culture, baseball history, whereas the more modern players, 1980 onward, are just players who I have a fond memory of.
So in the last couple months, you have transitioned your collection, and this is kind of the exciting part of it, because I just knowing you and being friends and seeing you at the National, I know that you made a big move, and this is a move that you'd been talking about for a long time, and you never thought you were going to get there. Tell us a bit about that and what the move was that you made.
Sure. So it is I'll save the card, but it is a two-tiered move. So right around January, the start of this year, I moved about 3 dozen cards because I picked up a 1954 Red Heart Stan Musial, which to me is my favorite looking Stan Musial. It's a 70-year-old color match, right? Picked it up in a PSA 6, would have been even higher than that had it not been for some little stain on the back. Stunning, the best one I'd ever seen. But then I thought last October, it was around last October, November, I came up with the idea of, what if I went for my one true Grail card? And I think that you don't have a Grail, you have the Grail. Grail means one thing. And so what if I sold everything? What if I traded and moved everything for the one card? And it's the one card that if I didn't get it, I would feel like my collection was never really complete, as in, what am I even doing in this hobby space at all? And then I already brought him up, but I was on Dave Spinrad, the Rated Rabbis podcast. I think it was in April. He wanted to talk about it some more. He thought the idea was interesting, even though 6 months had passed, and I thought it was pointless. But he said, let's talk about this idea some more. And it re-sparked this idea. And then so in April, I was looking at my cards, looking at my collection, looking at values, surfing through Card Ladder. If I got rid of everything, I probably could get this card in a PSA 1, 1.5, or maybe even a 2, depending on who the seller was and what their expectations were. And so I started doing that. And I ended up having to move the Musial. That was awful, but I ended up having to move the Musial, plus other cards, and it ended up moving between 85 and 95 cards in total. And of the baseball slabs that I moved, it was about 92% of my total collection was gone. And so I went to the National, and I had resources in hand, determined, hopefully, to get this card. And the very, very first booth I went to had said they had a copy of it. And during the Tuesday night sneak preview VIP, they moved it. And then Wednesday, I went to another booth, and they said, oh, sorry, we moved ours on Wednesday. So I'm like, okay, this card is flying right now. It's off shelf. And I knew that there was one booth that for sure had it. MC Sports, I knew had one. And people had sent me the link during their preview for the show. They posted cards that they were bringing to the National, and that was one of them. And it was in a 1.5. And I hightailed it over there. I'd only been at the show for 45 minutes at this point, and I was going to be there for another 2 days, which means if I bought this card while I was there, I was basically going to be walking through a museum for the next 2 days.
Which is okay.
Right. And long story short is I did it. I got the card that I was going for. And it was a 1.5 with a PWCC top 30% eye peel sticker on the back. And I can now fit my entire collection into a Ziploc bag, essentially, if I wanted to.
Well, why don't you show us this card and the big reveal? I'll put the spotlight on you. Here it comes, everybody. The big card that really, I want to say, changes the whole structure of your collection.
Good. So not a rare card, but the most meaningful card to me, of the most important card of the most important athlete in American history. And it's the 1948-49 Leaf Jackie Robinson rookie card.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah, very, very nice. Now that
Congratulations, Dave.
From here, Dave, does not look like a PSA 1.5. Tell us a bit about the card itself.
Sure. So I'll hold the best I can. Sorry about the lighting. The creases, it has a couple of creases, but they're not on the cap, they're not on his face, and they're not on his body, which was, I definitely didn't want one over his face. But there's one right here. There's another one down here. But unless you look at it at the right angle, you can't even see it, which is wonderful. It's reasonably centered. The color is really nice.
Beauty.
Where the crease is most visible is on the back. You can kind of see it over here if I were to really zoom in on it. It doesn't have that bloodshot left eye of his that I was worried about. That was a deal breaker for me. I didn't want him looking like he was high in my copy of it. But it is the registration is very good, not great, but it's very good for 1.5. And there you go. So I've got this card. It's like hitting the reset button, as I've been saying, on my collection. And I've been, looking at cards on Fanatics, whatever they're calling it, and eBay since I've been back. And other than buying a couple of little things unrelated to my overall larger collection, don't know where to go next, because I want to make sure things fit, and I don't want to just be accumulating for the sake of accumulating.
How exciting is it to not know where things go next? I love that, because it's just a blank canvas. You can do whatever you want. Take your time. There's no rush. There's no pressure. Tell us about the feeling you had when you shook Mike's hand at MC Sports Cards, when you passed him the money, the resources he passed, when you were taking your first few steps away from the booth, those first few moments as a new owner of your absolute grail, the 48 Leaf Jackie.
When I shook Mike's hand, I was excited. When I handed over the money, I wasn't. My adrenaline spiked. It was, I felt a little shaky.
Sure.
But it was exciting, and I just sort of just held it for a bit, and then I put it into I had a messenger bag that I was carrying with me, and I put it into my bag, and I went to the food area. And if you went to Cleveland, where the food was and the tables were. I found a spot to eat at the table. It was pretty early in the day, so the lunch crowd hadn't hit. And I sat down and I looked at it, and just looked at it. And it was a couple of steps above numb. I felt a little bit detached from myself, like it almost felt surreal. And then I put it back into my bag, and I pulled it out because I thought it wasn't in there. And I put it back in, and I pulled it out, making sure I still had it. And I had probably 3 or 4 times the thought of, I've lost it already.
Oh,
But and that was it. So I think I just sat there for 15 to 20 minutes, just feeling what that was like. I didn't want to just have it in my hand waving around for that long, because the show seemed mostly trustworthy. Somebody would have to have some real gall to run up and grab it and then take off. They would have been tackled by 30 people. But I just sort of sat there and enjoying it. And I actually was thinking about the process, about what it took to get here. A little bit of, was it worth it? Immediately followed by, yeah, sure it was. Of course it was. And then from there, I went off and I met a couple of people who was excited to meet at the show. And then I just sort of went on with the show after that. And then every chance I get, I would sit down somewhere and take it out and look at it, or show somebody, or text someone the news.
Awesome. Well, huge congratulations. It's a big card. I think it's so interesting to hear the feelings and emotions you go through when you do, finally acquire your grail after years of thinking about it, fantasizing about it, feeling it's out of reach. All of a sudden it's within grasp. You made sacrifices to get it, not easy ones. Your Red Heart Musial, beautiful card. Maybe one day you'll get, maybe that's what you can do next. Although this is interesting. Here's a question for both of you, because I've recently, last year I sold a lot of cards from my personal collection, and I thought to myself, I can get them back, but I don't feel the need or the urgency to get those cards back. I want different cards now. How do you feel? I want your thoughts, Leighton, too. Let's start with you, Dave. How do you feel? Like, do you feel like you've owned the Musial Red Heart? Maybe you don't need to own it again, or do you think you might put it on your want list again?
That was the first card I checked out when I started looking at cards again, and I was so sad by the condition or the prices of the ones that are out there that I can't bring myself to trying to get it back, because I wanted mine, and that's gone. And the person who I sold it to and gave it and traded it to, he's a seller, and he took a lot of my cards, and he's selling a bunch, but he's holding on to that one because he's a vintage person, and he was blown away by the copy of it. I don't think I'll ever, well, who knows if I'll ever, but I don't know if I'll ever go for that card again. But to answer one thing, I would be really concerned if every card I gave up, I didn't want any of them back, because that would make me question what I was doing in the first place. Right. And I do have a list of about 8 to 10 that I've started a list to reacquire, because I like them a lot. And so I'm kind of glad that told me that I was on the right track with some of them. So there are some I want back, but it's maybe like 11%, 12%.
How about you, Leighton, from a personal collection standpoint? Have you ever, you see so many cards going through your hands, but have you ever moved a card out that was your one and only copy, only to not feel like you needed to reacquire it?
Definitely. And I've also been in a place where I thought I wanted to reacquire it. And then maybe for whatever reason or another, similar to Dave, I believe that what happens when we do this is there's actually some growth taking place in us. And we're all different as collectors, as people. And so, yes, I've definitely coveted a card again that I've sold, but I've also kind of graduated and grown to a place where I'm comfortable without. And not to get all philosophical as we're nearing our 50th minute of the 4th episode of the Vintage Spotlight, but I really like the way you describe the process, Dave, and your journey, because at some point, if the cards simply are just things we own, do they actually own us? Because we're not going to leave the earth with these things. It doesn't work like that. So what I mean is like I've discovered more than ever is the journey is so much more important than the actual end if I get the card or not. I'm going out of town next week for a big collection. I hope I get it. But if I don't, I can tell you this, I'm going to have a great time no matter what. And I wanted to add to this because it's a little bit different. And it's the really one of my favorite parts of being a card treasure hunter as a profession. Dave and Jeremy, I think you'll both appreciate this, is on top of going out and hitting the road and assessing things and buying and selling, there is the kid in me that is hoping for X, Y, or Z card to be in there. And like, wow, I'm going to be able to get a better deal on it or acquire it lower because of what I do for work. So believe me, I'm always thinking about what I'm going to either add or buy back that I've sacrificed to reach this point of the journey, but I wouldn't change it for anything because that's the way we grow.
I have another question related to Dave and, picking up this card similar to the one that we just talked about, which is, you build it up for so long. This card, it becomes more than just a piece of cardboard featuring a player. It becomes this mythical type object that, you lust for so long. You finally acquire it. It's similar to working years or decades on completing a set. You get that last card. Dave, when you finally got it, and this might seem counterintuitive, which is fine, was there any letdown for you? Was there any letdown that I got this card? It's like, now what? Like, is my journey over? What? And you said you don't know what's next, but was there any emotional letdown that you weren't anticipating, that you felt not right in those first few moments after putting the card in your hand, but even in the days after? I'm curious.
No, none whatsoever. I felt content and I felt relief because I hit a point sometime in February where buying any card, except for little ones that I'm just, filling out little projects with, that anything of any substantial value, I stopped buying or felt like a waste because I could be putting it toward a Robinson. I felt like it was just a waste of my time, waste of my resources. I certainly know the feeling that you're talking about. I felt that many times with cards that I thought were important, thought that I wanted. And the only two I can think of, I'm sure there's more, but the only two I can think of where I felt complete gratification once I got them were the Red Heart Museal and then this Jackie.
Okay. No, I think that's great. And you know what? For me, building a set, the only letdown is like, well, now the journey's over. To me, that's that kind of letdown that I'm getting at, is that period of my hobby life is now behind me, because the journey is, and like Leighton said, the journey is such a key part of what we do and the interactions along the way. I remember you showing me the Jackie after you got it at the National and how happy I was. Like, that interaction, I'm sure you had dozens of those, are so gratifying and satisfying as a collector in a community. We are part of this subculture, which we love for sure. So I'm glad to hear you didn't have any letdown. And one of the reasons why I don't experience that feeling often, although I have, is because there's always, for me, I love so many cards in this hobby. There's always more cards to pursue and chase. And maybe there's a new Grail to take that spot in the world of Dave Schwartz and your collecting journey. So really, really interesting stuff, Dave. Thanks. Thank you for joining us here on the Vintage Spotlight.
Leighton, Jeremy, thank you. I love talking cards. This has been fun.
Thank you, Dave. Congratulations.
All right, Dave. Thank you. I'm gonna take you off. We'll be in touch. So have a great weekend ahead.
You too.
All right, Leighton. That was great. What a great guest. I mean, he's got a great story. Make sure you guys, if you're not yet, you must be by now following Iowa Dave, Iowa_Dave on Instagram. It might be Iowa_Dave Sports Cards, but you'll find him with Iowa_Dave. And be sure to check out the Shallow End podcast wherever you listen to your podcasts. Dave puts out great content. Leighton, I think we're going to wrap up this episode.
Yeah,
and
it's a solid one.
It's a solid one. We had a couple personal pickups. Let's save those for the next show,
Sounds great.
and wrap this one up. So everybody, thank you for joining. Thank you for listening. If you're watching on YouTube, this podcast is available wherever you get your podcasts, on Spotify, Apple, and everywhere else. Please subscribe, hit the notification button, leave a rating or review on the podcast. We would appreciate it. Leighton, any final comments before we wrap up?
No, I appreciate Dave joining us. This was a lot of fun this episode, and we'll see everyone in a couple weeks.
And with that, everybody, this episode of the Vintage Spotlight is now over. Thank you for joining us.